Welcome to Lattes and Art, presented by J Squared Atelier, the podcast where we brew up conversation about art, creativity, and everything in between. I'm your host, James William Moore. Get ready for today's episode, Banksy Breakdown, with our special guest, the multifaceted artist Laasha Young. Today, we dive into Banksy's enigmatic works, explore the stories behind his art, and debate whether his pieces are playful statements or profound messages. Lami's work has graced the pages of Vogue and Women's Health and adorned the cast of Pretty Little Liars. Her work has been showcased in high-end boutiques and worn by celebrities like Helena Bonham Carter and Melissa Etheridge. Today, she'll be joining me in discussing the intersection of fine art and street art. Now, let's jump into today's episode. I have the thrill to get to have a conversation with one of my best buds, Lami.
Yay.
Lami, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted. Thank you.
Today, you and I are going to kind of dive into Banksy. And I know that Banksy can be kind of controversial for some, and for others, they just think he's the best thing that ever happened. But what's your initial thoughts on Banksy's work itself?
Yeah, right. So I'm not a fan, to be honest, of the aesthetic. I think it had a moment, and I understand this sort of outreach idea and the outreach potential that he has, but I think it's problematic. So in a nutshell, that's my feeling. Yeah.
Problematic in what sort of way?
Well, I feel like it sort of cashes in on the idea, I think the whole idea of the hidden identity, I think that's it's an avoidant technique. My favorite book, the Brothers Karamazov, a Dostoevsky book, there's a passage in it, a famous passage, and he talks about miracle, mystery, and authority. And that's how we sort of approach religion. And that's where the power comes from when you're sort of giving a message. And I think that Banksy's capitalized on that. If we knew who he was, there would be no mystery. And I think the not knowing who this person is a huge part of their artwork. And it's like we were saying earlier, it's performative in a lot of ways. So, yeah.
With that said, what you called out, do you feel that his work could be seen as fine art?
Okay, so I think, yes, I do. But I also think that this is where I feel like he's really successful, in that fine art is often really removed from what people can understand. And there's this sort of barrier to, fine art. Like, if you understand it, then it's not fine art. And I think he does a really good job of balancing on that precipice between, I think it is fine art. I think it can be, yes, oddly. Yes.
Well, and you're touching on something about this accessibility to art. And he is a street artist. He goes and does graffiti. He does these beautiful things that are out in the world and aren't necessarily in the realm of the museum.
Yes, right.
And do you think that has caused for him to have more popularity because he's accessible?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think museums are really inaccessible. I think museums are the famous white cube. Sometimes even the admission price is more than people can afford. So yes, absolutely. Like it feels like when I say he's problematic, it's not to say that he's not incredibly successful, that it's not a brilliant campaign to address these issues in art.
Well, and you said successful, but in reality, is he really making the money off of his artworks when they're sold?
Right. Absolutely not, from what I understand, right? Which is the sort of, very troubling, right? And there's a podcast I was listening to earlier about him and where they said that he sells his art for £100 and then the gallery sells it for 100,000. And so who's making the money? The people who have the money are purchasing this, and so it's not accessible.
So most recently, back in August, Banksy took over the attention in London, and he was dropping each day a new piece, and each one of them was a different animal. There were the monkeys and the mountain goat and the rhino that was humping the parked car, and there were all of these different animal pieces. And they were rather simplistic in that they were stenciled or felt like they were stenciled. Do you think that changes how people look at fine art? That it's so simplistic that just because of that, it can't be fine art?
I have a lot of opinions and I'd be happy to share, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
You mentioned how you find him problematic, and it's interesting for me that I find him that he kind of culture jams the art world. And I like that. I'm about breaking rules. And I think that Banksy does a really great job at breaking rules. I agree with you that I think if we knew his identity, his art wouldn't be as interesting. But I don't think that changes the fact that just because something is simplistic, it can't be in that fine art category, and that it doesn't have to be hung in a gallery or museum to be considered fine art.
Totally. Do you like his work?
I like some of his work. I really loved this last set that he did with the animals because there was so much whimsy to it. And I'm drawn to that. There's something almost campy or kitschy that he was doing by making these pieces. I look at some of his other work, like the Disneyland knockoff.
Right.
And I was like, okay, that's just over the top and ridiculous, and starting to verge into that almost not able to be accessible to all.
Yes, right. Yes.
And so I think in those sorts of moments, I think he plays against himself.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I like that.
He really does bring a spotlight to this idea that art can be in public.
Yes.
And that in and of itself means it's accessible.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
And so, from that standpoint, I love his work.
Right.
Because I would like to feel art is more accessible than what we know it truly is.
Yeah. I agree. Just to turn it back on you, but when you encounter a museum or high art that feels like, wow, who understands this? Who has the vocabulary to talk about this? Do you feel sort of excluded or put off, or are you also in that realm because you're also a fine artist?
I think it's made me keenly aware of accessibility. His work being in the public makes it accessible.
Yes.
My work tends to be in galleries. I've had a couple of pieces that have been public works.
Right, in Barcelona, yes.
Yeah, Barcelona,
yes.
Amsterdam, here in San Jose.
Yes.
And when that happens, everybody gets to see it. And there's something magical about that.
Yes.
But, my work right now is not collected by a museum. I am not one that I feel that has to happen for me to feel successful. In that vein, I feel maybe I kind of align with Banksy's thinking in the realm of accessibility.
I hear you. I think like what you're saying is that it doesn't have to be collected by a museum, and it doesn't have to be holier than thou or really challenging to understand to be fine art, which I love talking about this, and I love talking with you about it because I feel like this is what Banksy does that's really successful is the concepts are super simple. And I think I love that you really called out his even more simple, that it's just beautiful, sort of funny, kind of whimsical, like you said. How long has it been since the art community has been able to accept something like that as fine art, right? Like we talk about like, oh, it's, Joseph Beuys, like nobody understands him. And so he must be a fine artist, right? Like, which I'd like him, but I think that, but also like, I also will admit fully that I'm not quite sure what it's about. Right. So we love that. I love this sort of allowing art, the concept of art to be accessible as well as the actual art itself. I think that's really successful.
Well, in the institution, right, we go into a museum and we're looking at paintings, and you called out Joseph Beuys, and you're looking at it going, I need to find a meaning. There needs to be some sort of inherent story or societal ill that I'm supposed to see in this art. And, then you have Banksy come along and drop these animals throughout London.
Right. Right.
And it really caused a stir because I think we've been programmed to find meaning in every single piece of art.
Well, yes. I mean, and this is like a historic precedent from the, the history paintings of the early 19th century. And, it goes back to, there's allegories. And, I was reading oh my God, The Romance of the Rose. It's this 12th century medieval text, and everything is metaphorical. And so we come from, I think probably particularly in Western culture, we come from this tradition of metaphor and of meaning. And the meaning, I think we like meaning best if we don't quite get it at first glance, right? So there is this thing with Banksy that, oh, I get it. He's holding a bomb, or he's throwing flowers, or he's hanging from a window, right? Like there are these images that are instantly accessible, which is challenging in its own way, and particularly challenging, I think, for people with, art and art history backgrounds, because we've come to sort of, I mean, I'm figuring this out as I say it, because I think that like part of my dislike of his work is coming from this sort of hierarchical history, this expectation.
Well, and London was all abuzz, and it's like, what is he trying to tell us?
Right.
What is he saying with the monkey and the mountain goat?
Right.
And
Maybe
the
nothing.
Stork?
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's actually what happened. He
Yes.
came back, and his official page on Instagram said that there is no meaning behind this. So even though you have this gorilla that's holding up the side of the tent, letting the animals out at the zoo.
Right. Right.
There was no inherent meaning other than he wanted to bring happiness.
Oh, right. Yes, right. Why isn't there a place for that? I get that. I mean, I think we started this podcast thinking we might be arguing, and maybe we're not going to after all. I don't know. Maybe there's still time for that. But but yeah, no, I embrace that too. I mean, although I think, and this is back to your sort of original question. Like, I think, then how does it justify itself as fine art? It's a spray paint on the wall. What if your little brother, what if your 12-year-old kid, went and painted a monkey on the side of the wall, and it was pure love, just happiness? Is that art? Is that the same?
Well, and we're taught that the artist gets to decide what is art.
Interesting.
And that goes back to Marcel Duchamp. Telling us that a urinal was art.
Right. Love him.
And this idea that many of us as artists don't feel that we are artists for whatever reason. Is it because our art's not being accepted? Is it because we're in our own heads? There's so many things we can unpack in that moment about that idea.
Right.
But then along comes Banksy.
Yes. Okay. This is, right. I mean, and I think this is my sort of problem with him, which is that, so, recently at the SJMA, there was a little kid, and he, there were some pencils as part of some display, and the kid took a pencil and started drawing on the wall. It was horrible. Like there was an uproar. So like, why is that not just as valuable as Banksy? It's sort of irreverent. It sort of pokes fun at the institution. It's creative. It's spontaneous. So the kid, like, they had to erase it. It wasn't, it's not valuable. So what's the difference here?
And the institution, right? We use that word a lot. And I know I'm quite anti-institution, and I try not to paint a picture that sways people into that realm. But when something is so wrapped up in itself and is too worried about things that it forgets where it came from. Right. Which was having a urinal.
Right. Yes,
sit
right.
in a gallery.
Right. Yes, right.
You have artwork that's from street artists. You have photographers, which photography fought for a very long time to be accepted.
Right. That's right.
Fine art. We run into this thing that suddenly this guy comes along with a spray paint can and a stencil. And he has captured the attention of the world and the art world.
Right. But it's a cult of personality too, right? Like, he's not really a great artist, and he's not really brilliant, and his ideas aren't really groundbreaking, So what is it about him? Like, why does he hold this coveted place in our hearts when, people are spray painting on shit all the time?
Now, how much of it do you think that people are afraid to say that I don't like Banksy because you'll be in the unpopular crowd? You're one of them that say that you don't like Banksy.
I'm always in the unpopular crowd. That's fine.
But, you know,
right.
we
right.
see fashion, we see music, we see all of these different things, and people glom onto that.
Right.
Because they want to be a part of the in.
Yes, of course. And it's accessible. Like his work is super accessible, like which is the point of it, right? I get that. But I think that the accessibility sort of pushes you down the road towards feeling like you're part of this in crowd. And I think if everybody's in the in crowd, what's the in crowd, right?
Well, and who's deciding the in
and
crowd?
who's deciding? And where's the money? You know, follow the money. That's the old thing too. Who's making money on this work? It's not Banksy, as we know, right? Who are we really behind? Who are we really backing at this point, right?
Well, you know, it's that idea, do I buy it from the local artist?
Right.
Or do I buy it from somebody that's selling it at Etsy?
Right. Or not buy it at all. Or do I just see it and think, that's wonderful and move on, right? That's not a part of the art discourse and is sort of...
Well, and it's interesting that you bring that up because with Banksy's work, right, short of taking it off the wall, which it's painted onto a wall, of course, if it's on something that is not a wall, it's going to be really easy to run off with. But even in those instances, how does that get valued?
Right. I mean, really, to me, that's the worst. Here's the whole point of this piece is that it's not ownable and someone owns it and someone sells it. So, right. And where's Banksy? Where's he on this? What's his feeling about that?
Well, and may that be what his intention is.
Interesting to sort of disrupt the I mean, what I don't.
Well, I love you use the word disruption. He disrupted when his piece, the balloon girl,
right, the shredded piece,
piece,
yes,
and it sold for whatever it sold for, which was ridiculous,
right.
But the moment that the gavel hits, a shredder begins, and the artwork gets ruined,
right? But there's still, or does it? Like it's a really not a very epic piece of art anyway, right? A girl with a balloon, so you're not buying it because you love the image of a girl with a balloon. You're buying it for the brand name, and then you're buying whatever is left of it because it doesn't matter. Because for years and years, the actual piece itself doesn't matter. We've learned this from performance art. We've learned this from
performance arts and
installations. Yeah,
but it's an interesting comment because there's part of me too that feels that his work is performance.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, I see what you're saying. And from that realm, right? Like if you put it in that context, like the intention is to see what happens when something is unownable and people want to own it. That's interesting, right? Yeah.
And we don't see him painting it.
Right.
But it appears.
Right.
And then it's on a billboard or it's on a wall or, and suddenly it's out in the world to be seen. And who owns it?
Who owns it? Right. Honestly, it becomes part of the corporate machine at that point. And I feel like that's sort of where I'm stuck at, who owns it? How does it happen? Who gets it? How do they get it? How do they pry it off the wall? And then, it's just another piece, another commodity, frankly, which, it might as well be $1,000 pair of sneakers. There's no more integrity in it at that point.
Well, and you use the word commodity, which the art world really has become a commodity.
Oh my God,
People aren't buying an art piece because they like it.
Right.
They're buying it because it's an investment.
Right.
And I just listened to a podcast the other day from Art News that they talked about how the art markets are struggling and some of the pieces that are going up for auction aren't selling. But we had this whole period during COVID that people were just buying whatever.
Right.
And they weren't buying it because they liked it. They were buying it because they could say they owned a piece of art.
Right. And they needed to be part of a corporate structure and they were stuck at home without their corporate structure or something. Yes.
Yeah. It's just, I think Banksy really does open up a lot of conversations within the art world that we otherwise would not have had.
Yeah, right.
I think he's lended credibility to the idea of street art.
Right.
And that those artists are in fact artists, that they have a rightful place alongside other painters and sculptors. And I
don't think he's actually given that to them yet, though. I mean, I think he's found that for himself. But, you walk down the streets of San Jose and they're painting over the street art, So are thousands of other anonymous street artists being recognized now? Not that I know of.
They may not be recognized, but I think they're given credibility. I
Okay.
think that within the art world themselves,
Mm-hmm.
someone's going, this person's talented. This is a beautiful allegory that they've
Right.
painted underneath a bridge.
Right.
And then
Right.
the city comes along, or, the public works come along and wipe that out.
Right.
That also is funny to me because cities want to have public art.
Right. Yes, right.
And if someone comes along and pulls a Banksy, it gets washed over.
Right. That's the thing, right? Like, so where is the where is the, who's paying for it and why, and what gets produced and why, and what gets saved and why, right? I guess Adobe in downtown San Jose is paying for tons of street art. There's 400 pieces of street art sanctioned street art in San Jose, paid for by local companies, which is wonderful, right? But
And we were in Europe over the holidays. Vienna had these sanctioned areas up the riverbank that had these cement walls that they were painting. And they were having artists come in and paint those. They sanctioned it.
right.
And we have here locally in San Jose and even in Palm Springs and Los Angeles and all the major metropolitan spots, we're working with artists to paint the power boxes for the stoplights or paint the crosswalk. There's so many street artists out there that are talented, and we've got a lot of cement wall that could be beautified.
Well, but what's so interesting, just in terms of yes, I agree. And I think in terms of Banksy, in terms of this conversation, what's so interesting is, number one, they pay nothing to these artists, $200 for a day's work. I don't know. And number two, they're paying these artists to paint these public surfaces so they don't get graffitied. And I think that's sort of an interesting irony, right? So that they're not taken by the people in their own hands, so that the corporations, so that the city has some say in what gets painted and what gets painted on it. Yeah.
It's interesting. The difference.
Yeah.
Graffiti, street art.
Yes. When I was working with San Jose State and doing the street art tour through San Jose, one of the attendees was from Serbia, and she was saying that her experience of street art was not the city paying you to paint art. It's you will get put in jail. You will have your hands cut off. You will be severely punished if you do any street art. And the street art, she was saying, from where she's from, is highly political. And she was very confused that we were calling these paintings that the city commissioned street art. And I thought that was an interesting distinction. Of course, right?
Well, and it gets back to this idea that who's taught us the definition of what that is. Is
Right.
graffiti different than street art?
Yes, right.
If it's sanctioned by the city, is it then art versus when someone's come along and painted out of their own supplies and with their own funds this beautiful mural? Is that not art?
Or a tag that we don't understand, right? That doesn't look beautiful to us. Is that not art? Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. I know for me, over the years, my opinion of street art and graffiti has changed. And I feel, with having become friends with some that do this and an appreciation for who they are as artists, I get it better.
Interesting. What have you sort of learned from that? I'm curious.
They have this talent. I photograph. I have a talent in photography, so I take pictures. I
Right.
can't paint worth a damn. It's
That's okay. That's
It's
okay.
an
Everybody's got
emotional
their
thing
yes,
for
yes.
me.
Uh-huh.
But then I stand with these individuals and I watch what it is that they're doing and how they're doing it under the cloakness of dark, hiding
Right.
to
Right.
do it. Yet they're creating these beautiful abstracts or these amazing allegories that tell of a culture that it's important we learn it.
Uh-huh. Yes. Okay. And so this is their only outlet, right?
And this
To
is
like
their
share their view, to share their experience. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Because the world of art hasn't readily accepted it, just like it didn't accept photography.
Right. Still, right. Still, there's question, right?
And even with digital media,
yes, right.
that,
especially
anytime something new comes along, it's like, that's not how we do it.
Right. That's not how we do it. Right. Yes. Right. Yes.
And so having this opportunity with these individuals and seeing how talented and gifted from the start, not trained to do this, they were gifted.
Right. I like that.
That isn't really any different than what Banksy's doing.
I will contradict you here. I think it's very different than what Banksy is doing, because I don't think Banksy is all that talented. I think Banksy is a super media whiz, is brilliant, and like I was saying before, like the miracle, mystery, and authority, they've nailed it. If their message was, I am Jesus, I think people would fall for that. I think his whole media package is brilliant and successful. His artwork, I don't think so. So when you're describing someone who's innately talented, who has something burning in their soul that they need to share, and all they have access to is a spray paint can and a wall, that's something very different than what I see Banksy doing. Even though I understand what you're saying, like Banksy is sort of making it more okay to do that. No, I think it's very different. I'm curious your thoughts.
So if Banksy understands what his audience wants,
right,
I feel he's giving them that. And when I look at these street artists and graffiti artists that are out there making these beautiful murals or whatever it is that they're doing, I see them knowing their audience.
Okay.
And that's where I think there's a correlation between the two.
Yes.
Do I think that Banksy is more talented and he's not showing it? Possibly.
I could go. I could believe that.
If nothing else, he is shining a light on a space that art exists that society has wanted to ignore. My opinion. Society has wanted to ignore for far too long.
Yes.
And instead of learning that culture, like what I had the opportunity to do, and understand those artists more closely, it changed how I perceive that art.
It's more democratic. It's more accessible. Like what?
Absolutely.
Like what? Yeah. Okay.
All of those things. There's, we're here in San Jose, and we can walk along the Guadalupe River pathway, and there are different murals that are telling the story of a culture that existed in this community far before we developed it for Adobe.
Yes,
or Google Town,
absolutely.
or any of those things.
Right.
That gets lost.
Yes.
Because I think too much of society has discounted this type of art. So if I was to compare his rhino humping the parked car...
You just love saying that.
I do. But that versus one of these multicolored, hand-drawn, hand-painted, hand-sprayed, all of that. Now we're talking about the quality. We're talking about more than just having it be art.
Yes.
And getting a story across.
Yes. And it occurs to me while you're saying this, and I agree with what you're saying, it occurs to me that part of the thing that Banksy has offered is that you have the general public has access to a famous work of art while walking down the street, and there's something different there. So it's a different experience than like, oh my goodness, this is a really powerful, beautiful piece of art. It's more that, wow, like you were saying earlier, I guess, like I'm part of this in crowd. I can't afford $35 to go to the MoMA, but I can walk down the street, and now I'm a part. Now I'm a part of this experience of seeing this famous art. Now I can talk about it, and the content is such that I can also talk about it. And so I hear you on this. Yeah.
It's funny, right? Because Banksy's been around for a bit, and do you think that his popularity has waned over time or has strengthened?
Oh, that's so interesting. I'm really not on the pulse of that. What are your thoughts on that?
For me, I think he is an amazing marketer.
Yes. Great.
And that when he is not in the conversation, we get a new piece of work.
Interesting. Okay, so it's like algorithmic in a large part. Yes, interesting. I would see that as, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because we hadn't heard from Banksy in a bit.
Right.
And all of a sudden, no fanfare, but everybody knew it was a Banksy.
Interesting.
Animals start showing up, stenciled on walls.
Interesting. Well, and so Banksy is not just a person anymore, too. Banksy's a team, right? Banksy has a whole marketing team. I was looking at their website, and there's like a whole legal website. If you have questions about whether what you own is a true Banksy or not, Banksy is a corporation at this point, which is so interesting to me. And so, yeah, corporations are smart that way. Like, they know how to keep the value going.
I think Banksy followed a model that Andy Warhol created.
Oh, yes, sure. Yeah, sure, right? That Andy Warhol didn't create, he just called out. Like, right, that exists. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, this is a corporate way to do things. And Andy Warhol called it out and said, well, we could use it for art. So, right.
And, we have him not over-saturating.
Right. Very tasteful.
As tasteful as Banksy could be. But if we were seeing Banksys everywhere,
right,
and not just for a handful of days in the month of August,
right,
but daily for a year,
right,
would they still be as relevant?
Well, yes, I'm so glad you're saying this, because this is something that bugs me about him, and this is that sort of the Monet coffee mug, right? Like, you can absolutely buy a Banksy coffee mug or a Banksy tote bag, and I think, and at the same time, as an artist, his style hasn't changed at all. So you could buy a Banksy coffee mug that was, from a 1990s, image. And I think, I guess I'm saying a bunch of different things here, but I think the artistic integrity has sort of waned, if that answers your original question. So I think over the years, the artistic integrity has waned, but I think that the the popularity has stayed the same. Yeah.
But that's also true of any artist. Because we can go to the Art Institute in Chicago, right, and we can get the mug of
right,
Monet,
right,
or the tote bag of Seurat. Or,
right.
It gets into the capitalization that has come into the art market, which then also allows people to own a piece.
Right. Okay, right. So,
but is that good or bad?
Right. I love that. I love that question, because what is it? Because honestly, like the value, like the oh my gosh, my good friend has a tote bag with the unicorn from that tapestry, that the Bayeux tapestry or whatever, and it's her prized possession, and why would I take that away from her, right? But so what's our conversation about? Is it about artistic integrity? Is it about accessibility? Is it about value? Right? It's all these things, right? And I think that Banksy starts out with this sort of punk rock soul, right? Which is something that I think, as an old punk rock lover, I think despite the inevitability of that waning and disappearing, I'm disappointed. I think, can one continue to be a rebel throughout their entire lives? Can your work continue to push boundaries? His work has stopped pushing boundaries, in my opinion.
Interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you feel, what do you see?
I think what he did this summer with the animals, and then the last piece at the zoo with the gorilla, kind of reset for me back to he's getting to his origins. And now I'm excited to watch for what comes next.
Interesting.
Because as with Warhol, always reinventing himself,
right, always
creating a new persona of something.
Yes.
I think Banksy follows that same idea.
Okay, so I have two thoughts on this. And the first one is to totally agree with you and to say, like, bravo, like, to go to a no content, just purely happy imagery is unheard of, right? Like, that's pretty punk rock at this moment in time. And the other thing is that we know it's Banksy. I mean, it's so clearly Banksy, and there's not really a lot extra in it for me visually.
Well, and that gets back to, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation with you specifically, because we have different opinions of where it's coming from, but we can agree on some of the stuff. But the fact that there's multiple sides to this is so important to be a part of the conversation.
Yes, I agree.
And if there's one thread that anybody gets from anything that you and I have bantered back and forth, it's your opinion. You need to have one.
Oh, I love that. Yes. Yes, I love that, right? I love that. Yes.
Too many times we come into this and it's like, oh, I love this, right? We
Right.
talked a little earlier. I love this because everybody else is loving it. It's
Right.
like, okay, be original.
Right. Yes, right. Or at least be authentic or be in touch with your own sense. Yes, absolutely. Have the courage. Right?
Courage in art, I think, is one of the things that gives us our most power.
Oh, I love that.
When we tap into that courage is when it's noticed.
Well, I have to say, like, I'm very excited to talk about this particularly with you because I find that in your work so much. And that's something I
you.
love about your work so much, which is that there's so much courage. I mean, honestly, photography is so raw anyway. And I think particularly some of your pieces, like your piece, I don't know the name of it, but the piece with you on your naked on a stool.
So that's projected words.
Projected words. It hits me hard every time. And I do think, I think even your circus freaks, which is, it's funny and it's joyful, but it's also incredibly painful, right? And it's also incredibly raw and it's full of courage. Like how, I'm getting shivers even talking about this, but like how does one share an experience of being outed or called out or othered? How do you share that with the people that are doing the othering to you?
It's interesting that, you used those examples. The projected words is me sitting on a posing bench and I'm nude. And there are homophobic words being projected onto my body. It
gets me very, it touches me really.
And that's my story. But then you brought up one of my funnest ones to play with was the circus freaks. These are people in society who have been othered or have been neglected or have been shunned, ignored, forgotten
because of their authenticity, because they're being true to themselves.
They are who they are. They have no way to get around that.
I see.
And a lot of times with my work, people will say, "Oh, are you doing okay?" when they look at some of the stuff. And I have to remind them.
Like in general?
I have to remind them that my work isn't always autobiographical.
I see.
I think, like Banksy, have a theater in which I can operate.
Yes.
That the audience gets to be told the story I choose to tell them.
Right.
And that gives me the opportunity to give voice to others that don't
have
that theater.
Right.
I think that Banksy does that. I think street artists do that. I think that many artists do it and they don't realize it.
Okay, I was wondering, do you think it's intentional? Do you think these artists are going out of their way to share a story that they think will uplift?
I did a podcast with Rostin Johnson about creativity inside the artist's mind. And we talked about how he looks to YouTube videos, he looks to music, he looks to literature that has touched his life. He is not alone in using these kinds of inspirations.
Absolutely.
To paint, sculpt, photograph, build, install a story that's not necessarily their own.
Interesting. Okay. It's not their own, but obviously resonates with them on some level, right? Yes. Okay.
And they give voice to it. I think about Hung Lu, who made amazing paintings that were from the history of her culture, but not all of those stories were her own personally.
Yes.
Now, when she did the picture of her ID, her immigration ID, of course,
my goodness.
That is her.
Right.
And some of it's history of her family and where they came from, but there was an entire culture and people group.
I see what you're saying.
That she's speaking for because she has the theater to do that.
Right. I see what you're saying. Right. It's not going out of your way to say something about people that you don't necessarily know about. It's speaking your own truth that then becomes sort of universal to your yes. Yeah.
The circus freaks were fun because I got to play with that. And I was glad that I did that. And I appreciated how it touched different ones through the horror movie
Yes.
that was built.
Yes.
But again, my mother-in-law came to me when that premiered, and she grabs my arm and she goes, "Is Jeff afraid to fall asleep?"
You're like, maybe that's a different story. I don't know. In regards to what?
But our lives sometimes, we don't feel are full.
I think none of us do, whether they are or not. Yes.
So what does an artist do to find inspiration? What do they use as that basis to build? And that's where I think it's interesting with Banksy's stuff that he did in August. Everybody was looking for a meeting.
Right.
And there wasn't one.
Right.
To be honest, I wasn't disappointed.
Yes.
Because sometimes it's okay to make pretty pictures.
Well, right. Or to sort of stand on an absurdist platform, which is sort of what it is to make pretty pictures these days. Like, the world is in so much pain and so much chaos that to ignore that and sort of just do something cute it's a stance. Absolutely.
Well, and it's something else that is artists. For those of us that have been through art school, they always are telling you that your art needs to have a meaning. You need to research. You need to do all of these things.
Right. To the extent of ridiculousness. Yes.
However, there's a flip side of that. What's your audience?
Right.
Who is your audience?
Right.
Do you have one?
Right.
And what is the story you're trying to tell to that audience?
Right.
And then beyond that, does that audience actually want to hold on to that story and purchase that piece of art?
Right.
And I think there's a breakdown in the art world with that.
I think also, like, the meaning, I think, is the work attractive? Has that lost any part of this conversation? Is the work beautiful? Is the work interesting visually?
It's funny. I make all different kinds of imagery with my photographs and what I do with them afterwards. It all starts with a photograph, but then it ends up somewhere else. That short horror film, I'll never sell it. It'll never be licensed.
You don't know that. J.J. Abrams or whatever.
But there's other pieces of it. The tarot card series that I'm continuing to build. There are pieces of that have sold.
Love it. They're so good.
They have an audience. And I think if we can break down why art isn't accessible, I think we'll see more acceptance of like what Banksy does in the world with the rest of the street artists.
Okay, I love that, and I hear you, and I'm finding my own resistance like just welling in my stomach as you say that. And I really realize that a lot of it has to do with my indoctrination from art school, feeling sort of like, well, we've put in the time, we've studied history, we know what's valuable. We know what content is. We know the historical trajectory of this idea. And all of that comes up like into the top of my chest when you say that. And then I realize like it's time to question that maybe. Like maybe that's just the way we've always done it, which is the thing I'm like sort of pushing against, right?
How is Banksy any different in today's time of art than Monet and the other impressionists were in the late 1800s?
And I don't know this for sure, but I feel sort of an artistic integrity, which Banksy in some ways to me sort of just does the same shtick over and over again. And I feel like there was this like real genuine sort of delight in discovery with the Impressionists as they were starting. And I think that's what we respond to still. And then I do think, once they become successful, then they do the same thing, right? But I feel like Banksy maybe sort of started with the trajectory of the shtick as opposed to the deep discovery. And I may be very wrong in that. I'm not. Yeah.
Well, I hope you're wrong because I have a shtick and I'm sticking with it. It's like, I make fun of things.
Right. Yes. Right. Yes. Right.
Humorous ideas. I'm staying there.
Okay. All right. I respect that. And honestly, like, I think too, maybe being sort of ADD in the ADD world, like, I think that, maybe I'm too wedded to the idea that investigate something, move on. There's so much to be gained by really sticking with your shtick. I appreciate that also. Yes.
Lami, as we wrap this up today, with Banksy's works, with street artists' work, do you feel they should be preserved and protected?
Oh.
Similar to how we put value on a Monet.
Right. Oh, Oh, that's such a good question. What are your thoughts? I'm like, I have to think about this for a minute.
For me, I do feel it needs to be protected. It's public art, and we as a society need more public art. It's where true stories tend to be told. It's a history that hasn't been tainted by society. There's something real about it. And for art to be accessible, it needs to be where everyone can get to it. And when it's behind the walls of a museum, when it's in a gallery, when it's in a space that's a private home, it's not accessible.
Yes, I love that. I agree. And I actually think too that I love the idea of something that is incredibly valuable, but nobody is allowed to commodify it, right? Like, I think this is true of, historical artifacts, of cultural artifacts. Leave it in the ground where it was originally placed, and we know it's there, right? And the idea that any one person could go and dig it up, or could go and chisel this off the wall and make $1 million, but they don't. I think that's a beautiful statement in itself. Yeah, I like what you're saying about that. Yeah. I know, you're laughing because I'm agreeing. But
Yay.
Yay.
Lami, thank you so much for joining me today. This is just, as always, a delight when I get to have a conversation with you.
Thank you so much, James. I feel exactly the same. Thank you.
With those last sips of latte, that concludes today's episode of Lattes and Art, presented by J Squared Atelier. A huge thank you to Laasha Young for joining us and lending her unique perspective on Banksy and the fine art world. If you're inspired by her story as much as I am, be sure to check out her stunning designs at her website, laamshayoung.net, LAAMSHAYOUNG.net. Lami's work will be part of True Thing Collective's Close to the Skin show that will be opening at Works San Jose mid-November and run through December. Lami will also be doing a solo show at Minnow Gallery in Santa Cruz in January 2025. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an update. And if you're loving the conversations, please take a moment to rate and review the show. It helps others discover us and keeps the creative energy flowing. As always, keep creating, keep questioning, and don't forget to share your art with the world. Until next time, I'm James William Moore, and this has been Lattes and Art, presented by J Squared Atelier.